Welcome, this is Jen the Liberty Lion, and today I'm going to talk about Lecture 3 of Austin's book, How to Do Things with Words. Okay, I've gone over the first two lessons, or lectures, and I've got some notes here. Now I've got a whole lot of pages here. I'm probably going to have to split this up into a few different sections. So I have two things going on here. I have my notes, and then I have a reading directly from his book. So I'll be reading some parts directly from his book, and before I start those, I'll say, and then Austin says, or he continues, or something to that effect. But when I read my notes, I'll say notes, or here's what I have to say about it, so that you always know the difference between what he's saying and what I'm saying. So basically, I'm taking what he says about the performatives, and I'm taking his simplified examples and putting in our real-time, more complex situations that we are in with our government, okay? So I start off with notes, okay? So my notes here is to remind you that saying something in some cases is not saying something, but is doing something. So when we say something, it's part of what we're doing. When saying something is part of the doing of something, so we say we are saying something, but the vocalization of a thing is not just saying the thing, but doing the thing. When we sing a song, we do not say I said the song. We say I sing, or I sang the song, because singing is not just saying words. It is doing something. We sang. Singing is the act of doing it, and we sing the words in a melody, or we say the words in a melody. So saying words in a melody is singing. Just like saying I do is part of doing something when we get married. The saying of the words is the marrying. So marrying is doing an act, and part of the act is to say some words or recite a script. Okay, now that's important because reciting a script is going to be mentioned in another book that I'm going to go over later. Okay, so it's to recite a script. It is part of a process that has many parts, and some parts may have certain requirements, and those requirements might include a person being the right age, being sane, so on and so forth. Some other requirements for various types of acts may be being a specified religion, such as in a baptism, having a citizenship in a country to receive a birth certificate, or having a birth certificate to claim citizenship, being a citizen to be a person in government, being a specific bloodline to be a royal ruler, being married to get a divorce, being 16 to get a driver's license, signing a contract to join the military. Okay, so in his book, he says, in our first lecture, we isolated a preliminary way the performative utterance as not merely saying something, but doing something. So the doing of something includes the saying of something, as not a true or false report of something. So here I say, doing something as spoken words is not true or false, is simply to bring action by way of words. He says, in the second lecture, we pointed out that though it was not ever true or false, it was still subject to criticism, could be unhappy, and we listed 6 of these types of infelicities. So the infelicities are the problems, okay, the problems that are occurring or can occur in the process of a performative, so a performance, a ritual, a ceremony. So my note is, so when we bring an action about by way of spoken words, when it is subject to criticism, it is said to be unhappy. Unhappy because there are a variety of possible problems, which he calls infelicities. It is said to be happy when not subject to criticism, and the action is brought about properly according to his list 1 through 6, or what he calls Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Beta 1, Beta 2, and Gamma 1 and Gamma 2. And there's a reason why he uses the Greek system. Okay, and he does that intentionally. Then he says, of these 4 infelicities were such as to make the utterance a misfire. So there's 6 of them altogether. 4 of them are misfires and 2 of them are abuses. The act purported to be done null and void. So a misfire makes the act, the performance, the whole performance, null or void, so that it does not take effect. And my note, think of when a police officer makes a mistake in his script, when a ticket is not signed, when a reading of a proposed law is not done or not done by the correct person, such as in Congress, when a jury is not informed of the judicial process or their rights and obligations, when a warrant is not properly executed, when a president takes office but did not take the proper oath, when a contract is not signed or has a wrong date, so on and so forth. He says, while 2, on the contrary, only made the professed act an abuse of the procedure. So you have 4 misfires and 2 abuses. A misfire makes it null and void, and then he talks about the abuses. I say here, so 4 infelicities are misfires and 2 are abuses. These are types of ceremonial acts. They are of all kinds. Of all ceremonial acts that can possibly occur, we have some of which are infelicities, that's 4 of them, and 2 abuses. So going on with abuses. So then we may seem to have armed ourselves, okay? I like that because I've been saying for a long time now that armed also means power. Armed is also defined as power. So when you arm yourself with knowledge, you have power. So I say, I find it interesting he uses the word armed, because I have said that armed is also defined as power. And we have a right to our power. One of those powers is free speech, and by free speech and uttering words, by making statements, by saying things, we are doing things. We are bearing our arms. And by doing things, we bring forth the reality we want. We bring out about our world. We see flaws in the processes, and we have armed ourselves with a type of power. Okay, and he continues, so then we may seem to have armed ourselves with 2 shiny new concepts with which to crack the rib of reality, or as it may be, of confusion. 2 new keys in our hands, and of course, simultaneously, 2 new skids under our feet. My note is that I'm not sure why he makes this statement. These 2 sentences seem to be kind of out of place to me, but I'll read what he says following these statements. He says, in philosophy, forearmed should be forewarned. I then stalled around for some time by discussing some general questions about the concept of the infelicity, and set it in its general place in a new map of the field. I claimed 1, the infelicities apply to all ceremonial acts, not merely verbal ones, and that these are more common than is appreciated. I say as in acts committed to such as signing a traffic ticket and has become a ceremonial or ritual thing where a promise is made and force and control can be used. So we talk about that later, about promises. And then after you promise, they have a right to order you. I'm going to talk more about that later. He continues, I admitted too that our list was not complete, and that there were indeed whole other dimensions of what might be reasonably called unhappiness or criticisms. Okay, so is a misfire or an abuse. He says, affecting ceremonial performances in general and utterances in general, dimensions which are certainly the concern of philosophers. And 3, that, of course, different infelicities, abuses, and misfires can be combined or can overlap, and that it can be more or less an optional matter how we classify some given particular example. My note here is that each situation may have particular intricate parts that can have an abuse or a misfire. Various abuses or misfires may be mixed into that one situation, So we need to be aware of the variety of unhappy performances that can occur. So you can have misfires and abuses all throughout the entire performance. He says, we are next to take some examples of infelicities of the infringement of our 6 rules. Let me first remind you of Rule Alpha 1, that there must exist an accepted conventional procedure having a certain conventional effect that produced to include the uttering of certain words by certain persons in certain circumstances. I say, like marriage, like betting, like creating a proper constitutional law, like forming a state, like taking office includes taking an oath, like christening a ship, like a baptism, and so on. There are procedures with the effect that includes certain people saying certain things. And Rule Alpha 2, of course, completing it, was that the particular person and circumstances are given in a given case must be appropriate for the invocation of the particular procedure invoked. So I say, the person saying or doing the thing has to have authority to do it. This is so important for everything that I teach here, everything that I show you guys here in this channel. Authority is key. Authority is key. Having the authority is key. If they have the authority, you have to do it. If they don't have the authority, you don't have to do it. So do they have the authority? And do you have to do it? We discussed that. They have to meet the qualifications. They must be the right person for the particular act. If any person in Congress does not meet the qualification to sit in a constitutional office, they have no authority. As most of you know, I do not believe that we are all constitutional citizens of the United States as a requirement to be in the United States Congress or as president and commander-in-chief. Those people must have a number of years military service in the United States. That is my perspective based on the actual words in the Constitution. Okay, that was my note. Now here he continues. There must exist an accepted conventional procedure having a certain conventional effect. The procedure to include the uttering of certain words by certain persons in certain circumstances. Okay, now I can put away my laptop because I was missing the first few pages. Okay. The latter part, of course, is simply designed to restrict the rule to cases of utterances, like vocalizations, and is not important in principle. Our formulation of this rule contains the 2 words exist and accepted, but we may reasonably ask whether there can be any sense to exist except to be accepted, and whether be in general use should not be preferred to both. Hence, we must not say 1, exist, be accepted at any rate. Well, in deference to this reasonable query, let us just take accepted first. Now, another book you might want to look at for words and their actual meanings, and the problem with us not understanding the difference between whether something is used scientifically or artistically has become a big problem for the English language. I'm going to go over some of that stuff in other videos to come. But this is kind of what he's getting to here. There's a lot of words in the English language that people commonly misunderstood to mean one thing that don't mean that at all. Or if they do mean that, why have we given that word that definition? Because it needs a more accurate, specific definition instead of being so vague, because the vagueness allows people to misunderstand things. So then my note on this last section that he writes is, so he's talking here about how we describe things, what words we use, and if a different set of words are not better. So he says exist as in it just is, or accepted as I guess it will do, but he says these are not really good enough. Should we say be in use? So another thing about the word exist is how does something exist? So one of my notes was, for something else I was doing, was that I think it was Christopher Hitchens who said something about how religious people will say God exists because God exists, and saying that is not any kind of scientific proof of God's existence. Now, I'm not talking about whether God exists or not. I'm talking about the idea of God. So some people will say God exists because I believe he exists. So then the more accurate words to use would be God exists in my mind, and because he exists in my mind, he exists. Not that he must exist or he does exist, but he exists because I think him. I think, therefore I am. I think of God, therefore he is. And his existence is brought about by this thought that I have that he does exist. And it's a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, but it's like saying I have this idea, and if I have the idea, it exists even if it only exists in my mind. It still exists because I'm thinking it. Okay, so Austin continues, if somebody issues a performative utterance and the utterance is classed as a misfire because the procedure invoked is not accepted, it is presumably persons other than the speaker who do not accept it, at least if the speaker is speaking seriously. I'm going to post all this online along with my notes. When I'm finished, I want to add the website so that if it's shared around the internet, people can come back and look at these videos. Okay, so the last word was seriously. So my note is, we talked about non-serious things like joking in the last videos, saying I bet would be the same as some procedure not being properly followed, and having a misfire as its infelicity, which should cause the thing being done to be void. So not reading the law on the House floor would be a misfire. It would make the law null and void, and the law has then not been made. Such a law would be, for example, the IRS code. How can a code so extensive be read in its entirety? It cannot be. That is why it is not a law and has been given no positive law citation, because it hasn't passed all these performatives, the performance. It hasn't gone through all the procedures. So he continues, what would be an example? I consider me saying, I divorce you, said to a wife by her husband in a Christian country, and both being Christians rather than Mohammedans. In this case, it might be said, nevertheless, he has not successfully divorced her. We admit only some other verbal or nonverbal procedure, or even possibly we do not admit any procedure at all for effecting divorce. Marriage is indissoluble. This may be carried so far that we reject what may be called the whole code of procedure, such as the code of honor, involving dueling. For example, a challenge may be issued by, my seconds will call on you, okay, which is equivalent to, I challenge you, and we merely shrug it off. The general position is exploited in the unhappy story of Don Quixote. Okay, so I think page 5 is a good place to end, and this is almost a 20-minute video. So I'll start my next video on page 6 after Don Quixote. And with that, like, share, subscribe. Thanks for staying with me on this podcast, and I'll see you in the next video.